Olympic champion gymnast Gabby Douglas is returning to competition for the first time in nearly 8 years. The African-American gymnast said Tuesday she'll be competing later this month at the Winter Cup in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the first step on the road to qualifying for the 2024 Paris Olympics. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Some people just know the best rate for you is a rate based on you with Allstate, not one based on anyone else. So if you drive safely, you could save money. Good to know. Visit allstate.com or call for a quote today.
Is this the time?
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Clippers will go into tonight's home game against New Orleans with the best record in the Western Conference. At 34-15, the Clippers are a half game ahead of Oklahoma City, Minnesota, and Denver. OKC and Minnesota lost last night to move the Clippers into the top spot in the West. The Clippers are coming off a 6-1 road trip. They are 15-3 since January 1st and 19 games over 500 for the first time since April 11, 2021. Tip-off time tonight is 7 p.m. on ESPN. The Lakers are off until Thursday night against Denver at Crypto.com. Top 5 women's college basketball teams in this week's AP poll: South Carolina, Iowa, North Carolina State, Colorado, and Ohio State. UCLA is 9th, USC 10th. Top 5 men's teams: UConn, Purdue, North Carolina, Kansas, and Houston. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Drop that.
You like your style, guy?
At KBLA Talk 1580, we are unapologetic about amplifying the voices of those who have historically been left out of the conversation. As we approach our 3rd anniversary this summer, the problem with talk radio in Southern California specifically, and America more broadly, is virtually unchanged. All day, all night, all white. We make no apologies for our prime audience, but true to the best of our tradition, we're committed to expanding justice and freedom for all. So when we receive messages from listeners like Neil, we just smile.
I realize that I'm not your target demographic, but I love listening to your station as it is the only progressive station on the dial.
That's us. Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Checking your smile, working your back like it's going out of style. Shake just a little bit faster. Shake just a little now, girl. I'm dying to meet you, so let's mess around. Got an obsession with us getting down. Come just a little bit closer. I just need permission, so give me the green light. Give me just one.
I am ready to go right now, as is Professor Cliff Sloan of Georgetown Law, in this conversation about all things SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States. We continue our dialogue into this hour about all things Supreme Court, given these two major cases, two cases that the country, frankly, has never had a Supreme Court that had to deal with in the way we're dealing with it in real time. So this is a serious moment in American history, which requires a serious conversation with a serious scholar like Cliff Sloan of Georgetown Law, and I'm honored to have him on this program. His book is called The Court at War. The Court at War, as I keep saying, that seems apropos for the moment that we find ourselves in right about now. And so I'm delighted again to have him on this program for this full hour. All right, Professor Sloan, let's wrap up a couple of things that we were discussing in the last hour, and we'll push forward here. So I mentioned earlier that the Supreme Court doesn't have to take this case. I'm talking now about the case regarding whether Donald Trump, in fact, has immunity from prosecution regarding January 6th. A quick update here in case you've just tuned in. We were discussing earlier the appellate decision yesterday, which found that Donald Trump does not have immunity from prosecution regarding the January 6th insurrection. And so there's a question as to whether or not he's going to make it to the Supreme Court by Monday to file this appeal. That's what the appellate court gave him, only till Monday to get to this appeal. And then the question is whether or not the Supreme Court will actually take the case. They do not have to. And there are literally legal scholars on both sides of this question. There are many who believe that this decision by the appellate court was so sound. It is so brilliantly written. It was written by Republicans, and I should say not Republicans, but judges appointed by Republican George Bush and judges appointed by Joe Biden. So both sides of the aisle, as it were, have already had their say on this. And so there's a way in which one could see the Supreme Court not taking this immunity case, in which case, correct me if I'm wrong here, Judge, Professor Sloan, I just elevated you to judge.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, it may not. Well, given the way the American people see the judicial system right now, that might have been a demotion and not a promotion. But I digress on that point. My understanding, I'm not a legal scholar, but you are. But I have some sense of this, and so if I'm wrong, disabuse me of this. If the Supreme Court chooses not to take up the immunity case, then that lower court case, that decision stands, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And it means the trial can go forward, and you'll see the trial judge is a terrific federal judge. You will see her move that really quickly. They'll start getting into jury selection, and let's say that next week the Supreme Court decided it wouldn't take it. That's why the earliest we would have a trial might be early April or something like that. It was initially scheduled for early March, but Trump's kind of tactics here have succeeded at least in delaying it that much. But we'll see what happens from here. Now,
I admit up front here, I have heard no one. I've heard no one in the media, all the legal scholars I've seen and listened to and read and talked to, I've heard no one raise this issue, but I'm going to raise it anyway just because I've lived long enough to see stranger things happen. Can you imagine, you probably know where I'm going now, can you imagine any scenario? Is there any part of the law, is there any way possible that this Supreme Court, with 3 members appointed by Donald Trump, could do the unthinkable? That is to say, take the case and go the other way. Everybody's saying, as you said earlier, this ruling was brilliantly written. You called it terrific. And yet again, I've lived long enough to see people go the other direction. I've seen stranger things in my life. And so I'm wondering whether or not you can imagine any scenario with any legal underpinning that would allow this Supreme Court to go the other direction.
Well, here's the thing that would be concerning about that. Here's the scenario that would be troubling, is that, the trial court here in the Court of Appeals said there is no immunity for the former president accused of criminal charges. He has the same defense as any other criminal defendant would have. But what you could see the Supreme Court say is something like, well, he doesn't have it for purely private acts, but he would have it for anything that had to do with his official acts, which would be actually the standard if somebody was suing him for money, for damages in a civil lawsuit. And so we have to send it back for the trial court to kind of go through which ones are official and which ones are not, and where it applies and where it doesn't. And so they wouldn't be saying, sweeping victory for Trump in their words, but in effect, it would be a sweeping victory for him because it would just tie it up and delay it, and it would never get tried for a long time. So I could see them doing that, and that would be a real problem. I don't see any scenario where they would just say he's absolutely immune, he can't be prosecuted, no way. But they could do this other thing where they would think they're sort of, going down the middle and saying, well, maybe on some things, maybe not on other things, and actually knowing that it's going to take a long time to sort that out.
All right, so that's why I asked that question. That's precisely why I asked. There's always a way for this court or any court to justify their own rulings if they choose to do so. They hear the cases they want to hear, and they can always find. I've been at this ain't my first rodeo, man. I ain't no law professor, but I've been around long enough to know I've seen lawyers and judges do strange things, and they always find a way to justify it by the law. Having said what you just said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being likely, 1 being or 0 being not likely at all, how likely is it that you think they might take that approach?
I would put it at maybe a 3 or a 4.
Okay, I'll live with that. When we come forward, the other question that we didn't wrap in our previous hour, talking to Georgetown Law Professor Cliff Sloan, a question that comes from our audience, and I'm anxious to get his take on this. Why is it that the judges appointed by Donald Trump, there are 3 on this on the High Court, why is it that they are not forced to recuse themselves from these 2 cases specifically about him? Talking about the case that they may take on immunity and the case they're hearing oral arguments on tomorrow about whether or not he can get kicked off of ballots by states like Colorado, Maine, and others. Why do they not? Why are they not required, these 3 justices appointed by him, to recuse themselves from these 2 cases? You'll hear the answer to that from Georgetown Law Professor Cliff Sloan when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good. Yeah, man. Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
LADWP is proud to partner with KBLA to share with you how to start the new year without bill worries. We're here to help if you're behind on your bill or need help staying current. Sign up anytime online for Level Pay to set predictable monthly payments throughout the year, including for past due amounts. You can also check out the special extended pay arrangements of up to 48 months to help pay down your bill. If you're a senior or income qualified, you may be eligible for Easy Save to receive discounts and also qualify for free and discounted energy and water saving devices. You can get up to $15,000 for past due water and or sewer bills and up to $3,000 for electric bills. But you gotta act fast. Funding is limited. You can reduce your past due bills and kick off the year right, because here at LADWP, we're here to help. Visit ladwp.com/cares today and find out more.
KBLA Talk 1580 is the exclusive media sponsor of This Light of Ours, activist photographers of the Civil Rights Movement. A dynamic new exhibition on view now at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. This Light of Ours showcases more than 150 photos taken by movement insiders from diverse backgrounds that reveal the vital work undertaken by a broad coalition of organizers and everyday people whose collective action changed America. This Light of Ours is one of 3 temporary exhibitions currently on view at the Skirball, which together explore issues related to civil rights, immigration, and pluralism. Tickets and more information for all 3 exhibitions are available at skirball.org. That's skirball.org. SKIRBALL.org.
Helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley and Georgetown Law Professor Cliff Sloan. His book is called The Court at War. We are pushing our way toward that book. After we dispense of this breaking news that we all know is coming tomorrow, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in the case about whether or not Donald Trump can be kicked off of ballots in states across this country. Never before has the Supreme Court heard a case quite like this. And we're talking with Professor Sloan about whether or not, and if they do, how the court will rule on this immunity case that Donald Trump is appealing, will in fact appeal to the Supreme Court. We know that's going to happen between now and the deadline of Monday that he has been given. So 2 major cases in the Supreme Court, both connected to this presidential election this year, and we're unpacking all of it from a legal perspective with our guest, again, Georgetown Law Professor Cliff Sloan. All right, Professor Sloan, that question that our audience, one of our audience members posed, I'm sure there are others who think in the same thing. Why is it that the judges that Donald Trump appointed, those 3, ought not recuse themselves from these 2 cases specifically regarding him?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and let me say 2 things about it. First of all, sitting on cases involving the president who appointed the justices, that traditionally is not viewed as sufficient for recusal. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But the second thing, which is really important, is that Justice Clarence Thomas absolutely should be recusing himself, and apparently he's not, because of his wife's involvement in these events.
That's right.
So that should be a recusal. But on the first one, it just generally is not viewed as enough. And you have justices not in the context of criminal prosecution or disqualification from the ballot, but they're reviewing the constitutionality of the actions of the president who appointed them. You had, when some President Obama's policies were before the Supreme Court, his appointees, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, didn't recuse themselves. And in the Nixon tapes case, the court unanimously ruled against him, including the Nixon appointees, and it was written by Chief Justice Warren Burger, who he had appointed. And there are a lot of other examples like that. Mm-hmm. So that generally is not a reason for recusal. But on the other hand, if a justice or a family member is involved in the underlying events, then it absolutely should lead to a recusal. And here you have Justice Thomas's wife, who was at the rally on January 6th, she was very involved in all these Stop the Steal activities, and she was in direct communications with the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows.
That's right.
About how to further all of these, projects to block the election of Joe Biden, the certification of him in the Electoral College. So I absolutely think Justice Clarence Thomas has no business sitting on either of these cases, but by all indications, he's going to continue to sit on them.
Okay, so that raises a few other questions. Let's continue down this path. Why is it that Clarence Thomas is not recusing himself? I think I know the answer to that. Arrogance, number one. But why is he not recusing himself, and why is it that John Roberts, the Chief Justice, doesn't have any authority, or does he, to make Clarence Thomas recuse himself from this case?
Well, he doesn't, unfortunately, because, and this is a problem, and it's been talked about a lot in the context of also, some of the financial benefits that Justice Thomas and Justice Alito have gotten from these, right-wing billionaires. There's no binding ethics code on the justices. There's no enforcement mechanism. It's up to each justice to make his or her decisions about recusal. And, the Supreme Court did a little bit. It issued something earlier at the end of last year, but it has no teeth. Nope. It's not enforceable, and it still leaves it up to each justice. I mean, it's really very unfortunate. And I don't think this should be a partisan issue. I think this should be a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue. We need to have confidence in the Supreme Court and the justices. And it is not a rational way to do our business that we leave it up to the justice. We leave it up to Justice Thomas here, and there's no sort of neutral arbiter to say this is an obvious conflict. Yeah. You shouldn't be sitting on this case.
No, I recall, we discussed it on this program, of course, when they instituted those so-called ethics reforms. I said then, I repeat now, they were then and they are now as weak as pre-sweetened Kool-Aid. That's how weak they were. And it's laughable that we are, here again dealing with 2 major cases, potentially regarding Donald Trump specifically. Clarence Thomas's wife, Jenny, as you mentioned it, was at the rally, involved, and in the hours and days thereafter, on the phone with the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, texting him repeatedly. All of this came out in the January 6th Select Committee hearings chaired by our friend Benny Thompson. So we know the extent to which Clarence Thomas's wife was in the midst in the middle of all of this. And for those reasons, as Professor Sloan says, and I wholeheartedly agree, he ought to recuse himself. Here's my last question, I think, on that, and then we'll push to what they're hearing tomorrow, these oral arguments on whether Trump should be kicked off the ballot that Clarence Thomas apparently is not recusing himself from. Here's the question. So long as the court behaves in this way, how in the world does Chief Justice John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, or anybody else think they can rebuild the American trust in that branch of government?
Well, that's a great
or do they not care? Or do they not care?
Well, I think there's a mix of views. I think Chief Justice John Roberts cares very much, and I think he is very concerned about the sort of complete collapse of public confidence in the Supreme Court for very good reasons, in my opinion. There's been this complete collapse, but you get the feeling that justices like Justice Thomas and Justice Alito, they don't care at all. I mean, Justice Alito has been particularly outspoken about it, and they almost take it as a badge of honor that people are getting so upset about it. So I think there's a real range on the court. And, you know, some people say that in some ways, on some things, it's a 3-3-3 court where you've got the three liberals and you've got, you know, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Barrett, maybe a little more concerned with the sort of institutional rules for the court. And then you've got, you know, Justices Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, who don't seem to be concerned about it at all.
All right. Let me move now to Thursday. We spent a lot of time talking about yesterday and what will come of yesterday or not. Now I want to talk about tomorrow because tomorrow the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments regarding whether or not Donald Trump can be kicked off ballots or not allowed on ballots in states like Colorado, Maine, and elsewhere. Professor Sloan, you have argued before the Supreme Court 7 times. 7 times you've argued in front of this court. Take us inside tomorrow and give us a sense of what's going to happen when these oral arguments are made on this issue tomorrow.
Yeah, so the justices are going to be very, very active in questioning the lawyers, and there are really 3 main issues here. One is in terms of President Trump's arguments about why the Colorado Supreme Court was wrong and he should be on the ballot. And again, this goes back to a provision in the 14th Amendment, which was adopted in 1868, very famous amendment that has a lot of very important provisions on equal protection and due process. But there's this insurrection provision which has not gotten very much attention. It hasn't been before the Supreme Court because, fortunately, we haven't had very many insurrections in our country. But it was adopted after the Civil War, and it said that if somebody previously had sworn an oath to the United States, then they are disqualified to hold any offices under the United States. And it was sort of a big deal with the former Confederates, but nobody's thought about it in a long time. And the Colorado Supreme Court said President Trump engaged in insurrection. There were factual findings about that in the Colorado courts. Under the plain language of the 14th Amendment, he is not eligible to be president. So that's what the case is about. Now, President Trump, former President Trump, Mr. Trump raises 3 arguments.
Okay, I hear you. I feel you on that. Keep going.
So he raises 3 arguments. And the first one is that it doesn't apply to the office of president, that it applies to other all federal offices of the United States, state and local offices, but not president, because it doesn't name the president, and other parts of the Constitution name the president. Now, on a common sense basis, this is kind of an absurd argument, because the idea that the president wouldn't be covered by the language officers of the United States, it just seems like you'd be, laughed out of a bar if you tried to make that argument. On the other hand, there are some justices on the Supreme Court who focus on the text in a very, very technical way, and they're going to be pressing the lawyers for the people who succeeded in getting him disqualified about, well, why does it say president in this part of the Constitution? It doesn't say it here. But that's the first issue, is the presidency covered? The second issue is whether you need to have a law passed by Congress that would sort of set out what the procedures are for disqualification. And there actually was one that was passed in 1870. It was repealed in 1948 because that seemed like ancient history in terms of insurrections. And so the argument is, the technical legal term is that it's not self-executing. You need a law from Congress, and then they would proceed under that. And there was a procedure in Colorado. There should be the same procedure in Colorado or Georgia or California or any place else for disqualification. And then the third one is the argument that he did not engage in insurrection, that there's no, he wasn't at the Capitol. He wasn't breaching the Capitol. You look at his speech on the ellipse, former President Trump's lawyers say, he included language about a peaceful protest. He said we have to fight like hell. People talk like that in politics all the time. Now, let me tell you, on the first one, I think, as I said, I think it's an absurd argument, but I think there will be some justices asking about this question of whether the presidency is covered. On the second one, I think the court's going to be very, very interested in that one. And I think actually that the Supreme Court and Chief Justice Roberts, they're going to be looking for a way of maybe getting out of this and keeping their head down in their view. And they would be saying, look, it's up to Congress, and Congress hasn't passed a law here, and we need Congress to pass a law. So it may be a very attractive out for them. It may be, as people say, an off-ramp for them. Now, I think that would be very wrong because it's in the Constitution. You don't need Congress to pass a law. And what it would mean is that even if somebody was, a blatant insurrectionist, as the lower courts found here, former President Trump was, but you can imagine any scenario. Well, unless Congress has acted, that person is still eligible for office. But that may hold a lot of appeal for the court. And on the engage in insurrection point, whether he engaged in insurrection, I think that a lot of justices will be pressing this argument. Well, wasn't this free speech? It wasn't really explicit inciting people to violence, which is the standard under the First Amendment. But I think at the end of the day, I think the justices are not going to want to be getting into making a decision about whether former President Trump engaged in insurrection. So again, if I had to make a prediction, I think that they're going to go for this idea that the Congress has to pass a law first. And there was a former Chief Justice who in the late 1860s said that when, justices used to ride circuit and they would hear cases on their own. And he said that in a case, and they'll point to that. So I think that might be the most likely scenario. I mean, I will tell you, in my own view, right. I think, as I said, I think that's wrong. I think that, people are concerned about the political implications of the court ruling a candidate off the ballot. I think that's what the Constitution says. I think it fits like a glove, and I think that's how the court should decide it. But I think the odds are overwhelming that the court's not going to do that. And one other thing, Tavis, I just want to mention that I think is very interesting about the dynamic of this case is that you have, scholars and law professors who have been writing about this in the last several months, and they don't line up the way you might think politically. Some of the people who have been the strongest in terms of saying that the Constitution should apply here and he should be disqualified are leading conservative scholars. And some of the ones who are saying, no, the court shouldn't get into this, we should leave this up to the voters, are prominent liberal scholars. So the whole ideological deck is kind of, not what you would expect. It'll be interesting to see how the justices react to that.
I've got two questions I want to ask about this when we come forward. Let me ask one right quick, though, in 30 seconds here. I take from your response, I want to make sure the audience and I are both clear, that you believe that when all is said and done, they will find a way to allow Donald Trump to remain on all 50 state ballots.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my prediction. I mean, as you know, you can never say 100% what's going to happen, but that's my prediction about definitely what is most likely.
I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. Here's the question when we come forward. If they do not go that direction, then what happens? And what I mean by what happens is if state by state can decide that Donald Trump is or is not on their ballot, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for November? What precedent does that set? I mean, how is it going to work when he's on the ballot in some states and not on the ballot in other states if they don't do, as Professor Sloan and I both believe they are going to do, which is to find a way to leave them on all state ballots. But if they don't, what's that look like? That's going to be we're already in a hot mess. I got to find another term. More with Professor Cliff Sloan when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
I'm Mike Moore. Now here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The chair of the Homeland Security Committee says Republicans will try again to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Yesterday's vote in the House failed with the final tally at 214 to 216. Had that vote passed, Mayorkas would have become the first cabinet official impeached in almost a century and a half. In Illinois, South Suburban Dolton Mayor Tiffany Henyard is on the defensive concerning criticism from trustees and the media who question her spending. The African-American mayor lashed out at a recent public meeting stating to trustees that you all forget that I am the leader and trustees do nothing but run their mouths. Henyard added that her critics are grandstanders who should get in line behind her. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Some people just know the best rate for you is a rate based on you with Allstate, not one based on anyone else. So if you drive safely, you could save money. Good to know. Visit allstate.com or call for a quote today.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Clippers will go into tonight's home game against New Orleans with the best record in the Western Conference. At 34-15, the Clippers are a half game ahead of Oklahoma City, Minnesota, and Denver. OKC and Minnesota lost last night to move the Clippers into the top spot in the West. The Clippers are coming off a 6-1 road trip. They are 15-3 since January 1st and 19 games over 500 for the first time since April 11, 2021. Tip-off time tonight is 7 p.m. on ESPN. The Lakers are off until Thursday night against Denver at Crypto.com. Top 5 women's college basketball teams in this week's AP poll: South Carolina, Iowa, North Carolina State, Colorado, and Ohio State. UCLA is 9th, USC 10th. Top 5 men's teams: UConn, Purdue, North Carolina, Kansas, and Houston. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to The Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment contributors in the business as we break down what's going on, who's got next, and what not to miss. Only on The Raw Report with Robin Ayers.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
If you like using debit over credit, shouldn't you also get rewarded? Well, now you can with Discover Cashback Debit. It's a checking account that rewards everyone with cash back on everyday purchases with no fees, period. Check out eligibility and terms at discover.com/cashbackdebit. Discover Bank, member FDIC.
If you love to travel, Capital One has a rewards credit card that's perfect for you. With Venture X, earn unlimited double miles on everything you buy and turn everyday purchases into extraordinary trips. Plus, receive premium travel benefits like access to over 1,300 airport lounges where you just check in and chill out. Open up a world of possibilities with Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Lounge access is subject to change. See CapitalOne.com for details.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
We all agree that America has a very serious problem.
Okay, KBLA delegation, we need your help as we launch our 2024 Climate Justice Campaign. We would deeply appreciate you going to our KBLA 1580 website and filling out a short climate justice survey, which will help us better serve our beloved community as we build out this campaign. It'll take you just a few short minutes to complete the online survey, and the information you provide us will be invaluable as we do our part to hold folk accountable and amplify the voices of our people in this climate conversation. When you take the survey, you'll be automatically entered to win seats at our annual Black History Month luncheon, Thursday, February 29th. So, hit our website at KBLA 1580. Help us out by taking the short Climate Justice Campaign survey, and you could be our guest at our annual Black History Month luncheon, Thursday, February 29th. Thank you in advance for your consideration and cooperation. At KBLA Talk 1580, we care about the community, we care about the climate. We care about the climate. Made fresh daily in the Mert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley and Cliff Sloan, who's a professor of constitutional law and criminal justice at Georgetown University Law Center. He has argued before the Supreme Court 7 times and served in all 3 branches of the federal government, including as special envoy for Guantanamo closure. The author of a number of books, including his latest, which is called The Court at War. We'll jump straight away into that book in a moment, after I ask this final question about the issues we've been talking about for the last hour or so, namely these 2 Supreme Court cases that we expect them to rule on. One regarding whether or not Donald Trump does, in fact, have immunity. A federal appellate court yesterday said he does not. We'll see if the high court takes that case and what they say about it. And then tomorrow, they are hearing oral arguments on whether or not he can be kicked off or left off of certain state ballots like Colorado, Maine, and beyond, which leads me to this final question about this, and then we'll get straight away into the book, The Court at War, Professor Sloan. And that is, if the Supreme Court tomorrow, after hearing oral arguments, in the days to come, goes the other way. You and I both believe that they are going to find some way to leave him on the ballot in all 50 states. If they were to go the other way, what does that look like? Because it won't just be Colorado and Maine. I suspect other states who don't want him on their ballot will do the same thing. And then you got a real mess between now and November. How would that work?
Well, let me tell you what my hope would be for a Supreme Court opinion, leaving aside our predictions. But what I think would be the best Supreme Court opinion, and the one that it should be, is if they find on this record that former President Trump was somebody who took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and the presidency is covered by the amendment, and he engaged in insurrection. And they say that very, very clearly. And the Supreme Court is binding throughout the country. So I would hope they would write it in a way where it wouldn't just say, okay, this was okay for Colorado to do, each state can make its own decision. I would hope, and I think that it would be very appropriate for them to write an opinion that says he is disqualified under the 14th Amendment, period, in every state. He's disqualified. And so that would take care of that problem, that kind of patchwork problem that you're talking about. Again, this is leaving aside what we predict the court would do, but that's what I think it should do. That's what I think it should do under the Constitution. I think that's the right outcome for the Supreme Court to reach the judgment that this man, under our Constitution, is ineligible to be president, and he shouldn't be on the ballot in any state.
So by that time, by the time they eventually rule on this, they're going to hear oral arguments tomorrow. By the time they rule, and we don't know what their timetable is going to be, they move at their own pace, their own speed. By the time that happens, there will have been any number of states, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and others that will have already given Trump their delegates. He would have already won their caucuses or their primaries. If they then disqualify him on the Republican Party side, what happens?
Well, I think the party would then have to choose a new nominee. I mean, nominees can be incapacitated for any number of reasons, health, and it's up to the party to then, replace a nominee if the nominee, can't run for president. And so I think the party would have to, and I don't know if they have a process in place for that, but that would be up to the party to figure out what its process would be for a nominee who's ineligible and how they address that problem.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's their problem, not ours.
Exactly.
That's their issue and not ours. Before I move forward to your book, let me just pause for a second and say thank you. I talk to any number of legal scholars, all sorts of academics, and I say all the time that there are a lot of smart folk in the academy, but many of them don't have what I call a usable intellect. They're obviously bright. They're bright, but they can't make stuff make sense to everyday people like yours truly. So thank you for just for the last hour or so, just breaking these things down in a way that every one of us can understand and can follow. For that, I thank you. Now to your book, The Court at War, FDR, His Justices, and the World They Made. I guess the first question is, and obviously you can do this rather brilliantly, but draw a link between whatever you're telling us in this book that FDR did regarding the court and the through line to where we are today with the court we've been talking about for the last hour. Take it away.
Sure, absolutely. And there are kind of two big issues. One is the decisions, and the other is the relationships between the justices and FDR. And they're both very important today for issues that we have to deal with. And so, the first one, and the thing that attracted me to writing about this period is that there's this real sort of dual nature of the court in these years. It's the best of courts, it's the worst of courts, and they both relate to the war. And on the best of court side of things, in very self-conscious contrast to the Nazis, the totalitarians, the authoritarians, the people we were fighting, the court issued a whole series of decisions expanding and protecting and recognizing civil rights and civil liberties. The first big decision on reproductive freedom, striking down a compulsory sterilization law from Oklahoma, and everybody knew that Hitler was engaged in all sorts of forced sterilization, and we're different from them. Thurgood Marshall's first big victory in a case he argued in the Supreme Court, striking down the all-white Democratic primary in Texas and throughout the South. And it was a very big part of the context of the case that we were fighting a regime premised on racial supremacy, and that's how the case was perceived and discussed. And it was also World War II was a time of kind of great civil rights ferment and activity. There was what the African American community called the Double V campaign, victory over fascism abroad and racism at home. And there are other opinions. Now, these opinions, which, again, I think are the best of courts because they, really provided a very strong foundation for rights and liberties and had a big impact on other cases. They're under fire today by today's court. Mm-hmm. That sterilization decision was cited and relied on in Roe versus Wade and other reproductive freedom decisions, in the interracial marriage decision, in the same-sex marriage decision, and the dissenters in Dobbs, the case that overruled Roe, specifically pointed to the case. It's called Skinner versus Oklahoma as one of the landmarks that is clearly threatened by what the court did in Dobbs, sort of taking a wrecking ball to the existing law about liberty and reproductive freedom. That voting rights case of Thurgood Marshall, very important and influential. Some historians think it launched the trajectory that resulted 10 years later in Brown versus Board of Education, and also very important for a kind of expansive view of voting rights generally. And over the course of the last, 10 years or so, as you know, this court has been adopting a very different approach to voting rights. That case that Thurgood Marshall won Smith versus Allwright was a door-opening approach to voting rights, and the current Supreme Court in cases like Shelby County and other cases that are shutting the door on voting rights is a door-closing approach. And I think those opinions, the ones that were issued during World War II, as part of our self-conscious contrast with the Nazis and the enemies, served us very well. And I'm very, very, troubled and opposed to the way that the Supreme Court is dismantling those freedoms. And on the bad side of the court, of course, we have the decisions upholding the incarceration and persecution of Japanese American citizens, for no reason other than the country their parents came from. And there's also a case about a trial of accused Nazi saboteurs where the court took all of these shortcuts to make sure that they were very quickly convicted and executed, and issued a very sort of shoddy opinion. And I think even from that side of the court's legacy, there are very, very important lessons. Because first of all, there was the danger of deferring to the government whenever it waves the flag of national security. In both of those cases, the government had wildly inflated claims of national security, which have been proven to have been totally false, and the government knew it at the time. And the other thing is that the difference between the cases about reproductive freedom and voting rights on the one hand, and Japanese American incarceration and shortcuts with the accused Nazi saboteurs on the other, is that when they were expanding the constitutional rights, they didn't have to confront FDR, and they didn't have to confront him on a war issue.
Nope, that's a powerful point, that they didn't have to confront him. When we come forward, I want to ask you specifically about your time as Special Envoy for Guantanamo closure. Not a big stretch to get from the court at war to your role at Guantanamo. We'll talk about that when we come forward with Cliff Sloan, Georgetown law professor, author of the book, The Court at War. You listen to him right now, and I'm glad about it, on Tavis Smiley.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley. Tavis Smiley. Ranked number 45 on the Heavy 100 list of the 100 most important radio talk show hosts in America.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
Hello, I'm John McKinney, your candidate for District Attorney. As an African American who has served our community for over 25 years, I'm proud to have successfully convicted the killer of Nipsey Hussle, standing up for justice where it matters most. But my commitment extends beyond the courtroom. I'm deeply invested in youth development. And when it comes to our police, I believe in accountability. It is essential that those who protect us are also responsible to us, reflecting the values and integrity of our community. This election, I ask for your vote. I am John McKinney, and I'm running to be your district attorney. Learn more at McKinneyforLA.com.
Paid for by John McKinney for LA District Attorney 2024.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do Black history every single day. In fact, as the only Black talk radio station west of the Mississippi, we are Black history. Our annual Black History Month luncheon is fast approaching, and we want to be sure to give you ample time to get your company, organization, church, or group to join us at this year's celebration on the last day of the month, Thursday, February 29th at noon. Last year, we honored iconic local Black media personalities, including Pat Harvey, Jim Hill, Mark Brown, Beverly White, Sandy Banks and Pat Prescott and raised $20,000 in scholarships. This year, we're honoring Black Hollywood creatives who have used their artistic genius as climate justice champions. At this year's luncheon, we will be showcasing and sharing their inspiring work on our big screen. Plus, a scrumptious meal, live music, great company, and lots of fun with your favorite KBLA Talk 1580 hosts. So contact us today at info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. That's info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. We hope to see you Thursday, February 29th as we close out Black History Month. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
Professor Sloan, when I say Guantanamo, you think what all these years later?
Well, I think it's a deep stain on the country that we have kept, and there still are people there, without charges, and so I think it really is, a very, very terrible human rights abuse that the country engaged in, and as I say, I think is continuing to engage in. So that's the thing that comes to mind.
As Special Envoy, your role specifically, Special Envoy for Guantanamo closure, your role was what?
So my role was to do everything we could to close the facility, but also, very importantly, to move out of there people who were approved for transfer because the U.S. government had made an official determination that they didn't pose a national security threat. Now, you would think that once the government made that determination, that would be it. They wouldn't be held anymore. But what had happened, I was Special Envoy in 2013 and 2014 at the beginning of President Obama's second term, and they had been moving some people out in 2009 and 2010, and the issue exploded politically for irrational reasons, and there was all sorts of congressional legislation putting limits on it, including nobody could come to the U.S. for any reason. So when I became Special Envoy, nobody had moved from Guantanamo in a long time, even though there were a lot of people who had been approved for transfer, and you needed to either have them go back to their country of origin or go to another country if they couldn't go back to their country of origin. Like a lot of them were from Yemen, and you had to negotiate arrangements. And so I was negotiating arrangements with other countries, but there was also a lot to manage in Washington. We got Congress to change the law to remove some of the restrictions. And frankly, one of the things President Obama wanted me to do was mobilize the executive branch because there was the Department of Defense, Department of Justice. And so, within 18 months, we got about 60 people moved who had already been approved. They did not pose a national security threat, and they were just sitting there because there wasn't a place for them to go. Yeah. And so that's what my responsibility was.
When we come forward, I want to circle back to the book, The Court at War, but I do have one more question about Guantanamo, and it's simply this. Why is Guantanamo still not closed? Our guest is Cliff Sloan. You're listening to him right now on Tavis Smiley.
Seeking the truth, speaking the truth. This is the Tavis Smiley Show.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot
to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by participating in a virtual tenant workshop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. Go ahead, feel your engine. Admire that perfectly installed exhaust. Your vehicle's moving along this freeway like it was made from fresh installs and a whole lot of love. With eBay Motors, you get over 122 million parts to keep it running. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, they'll be the perfect fit every time. Plus, at these prices, well, we're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Sounds different, huh? This is Tavis Smiley.
This is Cliff Sloan, Georgetown law professor on Tavis Smiley. I got 3 minutes left, and I've got 2 questions. The first question is, you were the special envoy for Guantanamo closure in the early part of Obama's second term, and yet in 2024, as Joe Biden wants a second term, Guantanamo is still not closed. Why not?
Well, so briefly, there are 2 groups of people there. There are 30 total. 18 of them have never been charged with anything. They should be transferred immediately, in my view, and that's a question of sufficient will and commitment. But there are 12 of them who are accused of terrible things like the 9/11 attack, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others. Those 12 are not going to be freed or transferred. They shouldn't be, but the current law says they can't come to the U.S. for any reason, even to be in a supermax prison. So those 12, unless the law changes, they have to stay there. But at the very least, we should get it down to just those 12 who are facing those very serious charges.
Here's my exit question. Your book is called The Court at War, FDR, His Justices, and the World They Made. What most concerns you about the world that this current Supreme Court is making?
Well, it is the attack on individual liberties and the attack on the government's ability to address issues ranging from climate change to COVID response to a whole range of other issues. It's the exact opposite of what the court was doing during World War II, when it was protecting individual liberties and giving the government broad authority to deal with complex social and economic problems. And the current court, tragically, in my view, is turning that on its head. It's very much constraining and narrowing the government's ability to deal with these very pressing problems on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's allowing this massive deprivation of individual rights.
How blessed we have been today to have Cliff Sloan sounding off on all these issues regarding the present U.S. Supreme Court. Again, they will hear oral arguments tomorrow on whether Donald Trump can be kicked off of ballots in states across this country, and we will wait and see if he makes it to the Supreme Court by Monday, Mr. Trump, that is, to file his appeal, and we will see if they take up the immunity case that we had a ruling from yesterday from the federal appellate court that found that he does not have immunity from prosecution on January the 6th. So Supreme Court's going to be busy over the next few weeks and months addressing Trump issues, whether or not Clarence Thomas and others recused themselves from hearing these two cases. Our guest has been Cliff Sloan, professor at Georgetown Law. His book is called The Court at War, FDR, His Justices, and the World They Made. I've enjoyed this immensely. I've learned a lot. Professor Sloan, thank you for your time, sir. All the best to you.
Thank you. It's really been great being on with you, Tavis. I appreciate it.
It's been great to have you on. When we come forward, our friend Danny Glover joins us on Tavis Smiley.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Now here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The chair of the Homeland Security Committee says I'm the first cabinet official in